Hey everyone, I'm Haley from the Fetch team. If you've ever needed to place tons of identical elements in Revit and you copy them manually, you know it can definitely be a pain. That's where arrays come in. They're incredibly powerful for repetition, allowing you to create infinite copies that all act the same way. Today, we're going to break down what arrays are, how to use them right, and when to avoid them in a huge Revit 2025 update that changes everything. Let's start with the basics right here. At its core, an array is a tool that creates parametric copies of an element in a specific pattern. Think of it as a fancy copy tool. The genius part, these copies remain grouped, meaning you can easily change the number of the items or the spacing later, and they'll all behave as one smart unit. You'll be setting the rules for the first two elements and the rest will follow perfectly. You have your original object, and then you're only controlling the first and second object. After that, the rest of your array will follow perfectly. Here I have a project open in Revit 2025. Once we're in the project environment, the process is quite straightforward. What I'm going to do is select my box and go to the Modify tab, and under Modify there's this grid with 4 little boxes. That's our array tool. I'll click that, or simply type AR for the keyboard shortcut. First, let's make sure that Group and Associate is checked on. This will make sure that our array is smart and parametric. Make sure that Linear is selected, and then move over and see that the second option is selected. What I'll do is I'll click to define my starting point. I typically use reference planes or an insertion point to align my model. Then I'll click a second time to set the distance between my first and second item. Once I do that, I'm able to change the number of my array, and Revit will instantly calculate and show me how the rest of my array will be spaced. Now look how easy it is to change the number of your array. You just click the number after you select your box, and you change it to any number you'd like. Every time, your array will instantly update to the number of copies that you select it to be. This is super useful for quick layouts of repetitive elements in your projects. Now, let's talk about where arrays become incredibly powerful, but also where specific best practices are absolutely critical. We're going inside the family editor. While you can create arrays in a project, you'll most often use them within a family to build a complex modular component. Here's the golden rule that cannot be stressed enough. Always do arrays on nested families. Do not array raw geometry that you model directly inside your host family. Why? Because if you array raw geometry, it will ultimately break. This can cause all sorts of problems with stability, performance, and especially joining geometry in your overall model. By arraying a nested family, you encapsulate the geometry and its behavior, making the array robust and predictable. This also makes your overall family much more stable and efficient within your project. For linear arrays inside the family editor, we'll have the same 2 primary methods to define our space, second and last. So I'll select my nested family and type AR, the keyboard shortcut for array. Then up in the options bar under our ribbon, make sure linear is selected and move to second. Choosing second for array is frequently more beneficial because you're directly controlling the space between items. I'll set the first item and the second, and the specific distance will drive the whole array. So I'll choose the center of my nested family, and I'll move it the distance that I want it to be from the first item. So I'll click it, and then I can type in whatever amount I want for my array. You can see right here that the distance between the first and the second item is driving throughout the entire array. With the last method, you define the total span of the first item to the last item. Revit will evenly distribute the items within the overall distance. This is great when you know your total length constraint for a unit and you want to vary the number of items within it. So the same thing will go just like the second method. We'll select our nested family and type AR. Still select linear array and select last. I'll still select the midpoint of my nested family, and I'll choose a farther distance. And then I'll change the number from 2 to 4. You can see that Revit has automatically placed new models inside the first and last element. Back in Revit, let's go ahead and select our nested family. We'll type AR for array, and we'll go up to the options bar and make sure Radial Array is selected. Make sure second is clicked on, and click place for our center of rotation. Remember, we'll select the center of rotation first before we touch our nested family. So I'll click that, and I'll click the center of my nested family. I'll choose the angle, then Revit will automatically distance out my array for me based on the first and second item within that array. So I'll go ahead and change the number from 3 to 5, and you can see my array will automatically update. Let's talk about the last method with radial arrays. Same thing before, we're going to select our nested family and type AR for array. Make sure that radial's still checked on, and then we're going to click last. Remember, always click place for the center of our rotation. We'll click the center of rotation first, and then we'll select our nested family. We'll come down here and create a larger angle for our family. You can see 3 nested families have been placed within my array, but if I want a larger number like 6, Revit will place the new models within the first and the last item within that array. Now, for the really smart part, we're going to link our array's count to a parameter. We're going to select one of the boxes right here in our array, and I'm going to click on the line. Then up here where it says label, I'm going to click the drop-down menu and click add parameter. I'm going to name this number of boxes. I want to create this as an instance as it will give me more flexibility within my model. Once I click OK, you can see that now my array is labeled as number of boxes. If we go to the Create tab and under Properties to the Family Types, you can see my new parameter number of boxes is here. If I change this from 5 to 3 and hit Apply and OK, you can see that my array is now being controlled by that parameter. Here's a critical question. Just because you can use an array doesn't mean you should. Arrays will add an extra layer of complexity to your Revit model and family. You should only use an array if the number of the items that are changing is a reasonable amount. So, for example, if your total number of items, let's say, is only 3, you're gaining almost no benefit from your array. It's just going to add unnecessary complexity because an array requires a minimum of 2 elements to define a specific pattern. So for 3 items, you might as well just copy them individually. Always ask yourself this question: is the dynamic control truly needed, or am I just overcomplicating a static situation? Beyond the is it worth it question, arrays have fundamental limitations that you need to be aware of. So Revit's parametric engine is powerful, but it's not without limits. So when you array a family that already has complex internal parameters and constraints, the more you add constraints to your array itself, you create a chain of calculations. So every time you cause a significant change, Revit will have to reevaluate these interconnected constraints, which can cause significant delays. The next one, there's array of voids. Arraying void geometry is one of the most common causes of extreme performance issues. When you array a void, you are multiplying the complex calculation for every instance within that array. So this can bring a model to a crawl, especially during regeneration, saving, or syncing to central. While a single array is pretty light, a large number of complex arrays can significantly increase the overall file size of your project. This is because Revit has to store the data and relationships for each array group. So a bloated file size leads to longer save times, sync to your central times, and a slower overall performance when you're navigating your model. Then there's no individual customization, so arrays enforce a single unified behavior. Remember, whenever you select to do an array, all of the objects within that array group are going to act as one single unit. So if your project requires individual elements within a repeating pattern to have unique properties, an array might not be the right option for your project. Before Revit 2025, there was a massive headache for all family creators, the infamous array of one problem. If you had an array in a family and you needed to show only a single instance of that element, maybe the user selected 1 from the parameter drop-down menu, Revit simply wouldn't allow it to happen. Trying to set the array count to 1 would often break your array, delete elements, or give you an error. It was incredibly frustrating for content creators trying to build flexible components. This forced us into a clunky workaround, like maintaining a minimum array of 2 and then using complex yes/no visibility parameters to hide just one element when using a single instance was desired. Or we would completely break the array and just use individual family instances for small counts. This added huge amounts of unnecessary complexity and stress to families, and it slowed down content creation significantly. Alright, right here in Revit 2022, I have an array of 3 table legs showing. Remember the array of 1 problem I was just telling you about and how we had to use yes/no parameters? I'm going to show you exactly how we did that in older versions of Revit. So, right here I have 3 table legs. We would have to assign certain parameters to different instances within our array. So, I had to create parameters for the entered number of legs and the actual number of legs, as well as my array. And back to those yes/no parameters, I had to create a vis single parameter and a visibility parameter for just the array itself. My first formula is reading that if the entered number of legs go below 0, keep the number 0. Otherwise, you can enter any number of legs you'd like. The second one is reading, if the actual number of legs are less than 2, keep it at 2. Otherwise, the actual number of legs. And remember, earlier versions of Revit didn't allow us to go below 2. So that's why we have to set this formula to the actual number of legs as 2. Then I have my 2 visibility parameters. I have vis single and vis array. The vis single is taking the actual number of legs and equaling it to 1. So I have 2 visibility parameters. I have vis single and vis array. For the viz array, I'm using the actual number of legs is greater than 1. But remember, if I wanted a single instance in that array, I needed a visibility parameter for just 1. So it's going to be the opposite of the viz array formula. So it'll be the actual number of legs equals 1. So whenever the viz array is turned on, the single array will be turned off. But if I had the viz single on, then the rest of my array will be off. So right now in my array, I'm showing 3, but say I did want to go back down to 1 instance, I can type in 1 and you'll automatically see that my viz array checkbox turned off and the viz single turned on. Revit is using the formulas that I put in place so I can see that my array is working according to what I've placed. But now in Revit 2025, the headache is gone. You can finally set the number in an array to 1. Revit has automatically included those visibility parameters for us so we don't have to do it on the back end. Right here I have an array of 4, but if I want to change it to 1, you can see that it's dropped down to 1 and that this one is grayed out. So whenever you put your preview visibility on, you can see that Revit has already done the headache for you. The array group maintains its integrity and you only see the single instance. This is a monumental improvement for all content creators. Let's recap. What is an array? It's a powerful tool for identical and repetitive elements where you want to control the first 2 to control everything else in your array. There's 2 different types of arrays, linear and radial. Depending on when you need them, they're great tools to use them for repetitive tasks. Whenever you are choosing to array, use a self-contained object like a nested family, never raw geometry. This will ensure stability and performance in your Revit project. And be mindful of array limitations for unique elements or complex geometry. And the best part about it, the Revit 2025 Array of 1 update is a fantastic improvement for all content creators. If this video helped you understand and master arrays in Revit, please give it a thumbs up and subscribe to our YouTube channel. Don't forget to check out FetchBIM website for the highest quality 5D Revit families to enhance your workflow. Again, I'm Haley from the Fetch team, and I'll see you in the next video. Thanks for watching.